today, as well as our partners at the Center for Policing Equity, and really all the elected officials and members of law enforcement and advocates and community leaders who are gathered here and today in support of the SMART Act, or Senate Bill 50, which Senator Bradford has sponsored. I'm not going to go into the nuances because I think Senator Bradford covered that. But there are some who might ask why we are prioritizing a bill that focuses on traffic stops at a time when people in this country are worried about crime and violence in their communities. But within that question lies the very answer. We need our officers focused on solving and preventing crime instead of monopolizing their time with non-safety related stops that data shows have a history of actually damaging the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve, because these stops are ripe for abuse. And I would argue that in times like this, we can't afford to permit any more harm done in our community that will increase division in our communities or this nation. Like many of you here, although I grew up on another coast, the climate and the perception around policing for me has been colored by the images that I have seen on TV and my own real life encounters. For years, the beating of Rodney King that I watched as a little girl remained etched in my mind, as did the tragic deaths of Black and brown people that I saw on the evening news. Oftentimes, they were unarmed and at the hands of law enforcement. And to be quite frank, it caused me to have anxiety. And when I was in situations like driving to church with my family on Sunday mornings with my father at the wheel, it seemed like clockwork that we were pulled over time and time again by law enforcement. And so what I did is I found myself holding my breath and afraid to move, afraid to utter a word. And there was just this feeling of constantly being othered and profiled and being treated as an outsider in a community in which I actually lived. And as a kid, that really hurt. And while I can never say that I walked in my father's shoes, I know this constant profiling and harassment is why, to this day, he's in his 60s, he absolutely hates driving, and he will never set foot on the New Jersey Turnpike again. It's reality, but it's a reality that I know is not new or unique to me or my family. It's a reality that I know many people in our community have faced, something that we all experience. So I'm no longer a little girl, and now I'm a woman, but I've learned a lot during my time working for the Justice Department and in government and police accountability, and now as a civil rights advocate with the National Urban League. I've worked with communities, I've worked with law enforcement, I've supported grieving families from our communities, and I've also supported grieving families of police officers that have fallen in the line of duty. But today I understand, in a way that I didn't understand when I was a little girl, that we were then the lucky ones, because we actually made it home, unlike Sandra Bland and Eric Garner and George Floyd, who both, might I add, uttered, "I can't breathe." So that feeling of not being able to breathe, of not being able just to move and be free in our own space is something very real for our communities. And these types of encounters, like Senator Bradford mentioned, Philando Castile, is exactly what we're talking about today. So it's real for us. And I've also learned that training and accountability are important components of our work to improve public safety and the culture of policing in this country, and to ensure that we all feel protected and served. But good training and some accountability from time to time, we have made some gains. It just isn't enough. We need to change divisive policing policies like those that we're talking about today. These low-level traffic stops can result in deadly consequences for Black and brown people in our communities, and they're disproportionately harming us. So this is why the National Urban League, quite frankly, established this Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives Division in 2020, post those tragic deaths. It's why we're here. It's why we create our 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust, because we want to stop these divisive policies and do more than just do training, increase data. All these things are important. Fight for accountability. We also need to focus on prevention, and SB 50 does that. Let's refocus our officers on prioritizing the police work that we know they want to do and what we need them to do, which is addressing real crimes and real violence in our community. So Senate Bill 50 is for those little girls whose dads simply want to take them to church. It is for the community who wants to not only live again, but who wants to trust again. It's for a community who wants to be free to exist in their own right. Senate Bill 50 is a step forward in ameliorating these historical tensions. It can institute a new lesson for a new generation, showing them that a community can have safety and public trust is possible. That it is possible to exist without fear of your presence, that your presence alone is not reason enough to be pulled over. So we urge California, a state that is known for its innovation, to acknowledge the danger of these unnecessary stops and to make sure that there are no more lucky ones, and that there are simply people who are free to live without fear of injustice. So today, I urge you to join us in working to get the SMART Act passed in California. Let's stop the stops. Say it with me, y'all. Stop the stops. Stop the stops. Stop the stops. Stop the stops. Thank you.
Let that message sink in. That was great. Thank you. Up next, we have the Chief Executive Officer of Greater Sacramento Urban League, Mr. Dwayne Crenshaw.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Vice President Jerika Richardson just took my lines. Stop the stop. Stop the stop. Let's do it again. Stop the stop. My father, as Jerika mentioned, her father is actually in hospice care right now, and but I'm here because I know he would want me to be here. He grew up in Greenville, Alabama, down the hill from the plantation that my family was enslaved on. And he did with us the talk. Y'all know the talk. We had to do the talk. I've been pulled over far too many times. My dad's been pulled over far too many times. Too many of my black and brown brothers and sisters have been pulled over far too many times. It's time to stop the stop. Here's the concern. You've heard it from Senator Bradford, and we thank you for your leadership on this. You heard it from Jerika. We know that these pretext stops, I like to call them excuses, to pull us over, are based on our race, our skin color. We know that the number of stops decreases at nighttime because they can't quite tell who we are. It's no longer acceptable. It's not acceptable. We need our law enforcement to be able to protect and serve, not hurt and harm. Protect and serve. That's what we're here for today. So I am pleased to represent all of the California affiliates, from San Diego to Los Angeles to the Bay Area to the National Urban League. This is our priority. Our priority or legislation this year is to stop the stop, to make sure that no one else is pulled over and loses their life over an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror or supposedly a tail light being out. No longer will those excuses, those pretexts be allowed. I remember in law school that I was told early on that these pretext stops were legal. And I said, what? It's legal for law enforcement to lie to you in interrogation. I said, what? But then I was also told that in America and in our system, that what's legal isn't always just, and what's just isn't always legal. But Dr. King told us that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And today, we're taking to the Capitol to get the Assembly to pass what the Senate has already done and ask the governor to sign SB 50 so that no longer will black and brown people be encountered with unnecessary stops that will lead in death or other danger or harm. Stop the stop. Stop the stop.
Thank you for that. Stop the stop. Our next speaker is the California State Capitol Liaison and League of United Latin American Citizen, LULAC, Ms. Maria Gutierrez. She's the president.
I'm the president of the local LULAC Council 2862. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Maria Gutierrez. I'm with the League of United Latin American Citizens. LULAC is the nation's largest and oldest Hispanic civil rights volunteer-based organization that empowers Hispanic Americans and builds strong communities. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C. with 535 councils and over 145,000 members across the United States and Puerto Rico. LULAC's educational programs, services, and advocacy address the most important issues for Latinos, meeting the critical needs of today and the future. The California State Legislature must do the right thing and pass Senate Bill 50 to protect brown and black communities from pervasive racial profiling. Latino people make up about 43% of traffic stops in California, despite being only 32% of the population. The data shows that Los Angeles police officers search Latinos and blacks far more often. Unfortunately, far too often, these disproportionate stops have deadly consequences. Police shoot and kill Latinos at a rate 55% higher than whites and Latinos have the highest rate of arrest. We must all work together to stop systemic discriminatory practices. Pass Senate Bill 50. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maria. Our next speaker is from the Center for Policing Equity. We have Charmaine Leon. Please give her a round of applause.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Charmaine Leon, and I served with the Cleveland Division of Police in Ohio for nearly 13 years. Currently, I'm with the Center for Policing Equity. We are a research and action organization made up of former law enforcement, academics, and community engagement specialists that use scientific research to identify and reduce racial disparities in policing. Senate Bill 50 represents an important step towards addressing equity and preserving officer resources and morale. In my time on patrol, officers were frustrated with those who would go on what we call fishing expeditions, executing these types of stops. Not only because it infrequently yielded the discovery of contraband or weapons, but because we had fewer available officers to answer your calls for service. It is demoralizing to the officers who work to engage in more effective crime-fighting strategies. Here in California, according to 2021 RIPA data, in 97% of police stops For the infractions specified in Senate Bill 50, no contraband was found. Guns were found in less than 0.5%, and drugs only in 1.7%. The man hours used to make these stops is enormous. Spending time generating citations in the name of being productive or finding contrabands is a false narrative and undermines morale because it places a greater burden on a smaller number of officers. You cannot say you care about cops, their well-being, and support what you know does not contribute to the improvement in these areas. During my time leading the recruitment unit for police, fire, and EMS, I found that to improve recruitment and retention, we should be prioritizing practices that actually solve crimes and improve public safety. This is the reason people sign on to be police officers. There's a retention problem in law enforcement, and ensuring our officers can demonstrate effectiveness in the practices we employ increases the ways we find meaning in our work. Enforcing these minor infractions diverts our attention and resources away from more urgent matters and are executed mostly in Black and brown communities, even though the research shows, as the senator said, that these stops yield higher rates of contraband and weapons of non-minority motorists. This is not in line with intelligence-led policing, which I hope is the trajectory and the evolution of this profession. It undermines our oath to protect and serve the most vulnerable in our communities. This is not a fair and equitable approach to public safety. Senate Bill 50 is a win for law enforcement, racial justice, and public safety. And we urge you to vote favorably. And we thank you for your time. Stop the stops.
Thank you. Our next speaker is also from the Center of Policing, Police Policy and Policy Equity, Mr. Ignacio Hernandez.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Ignacio Hernandez. I'm here with CPE. You've heard a little bit about us. I'm based here in Sacramento. I am the lobbyist for CPE. Let me tell you a couple of things. One is I've been here working on criminal justice reform for the past 25 years. I've worked with Senator Bradford on a number of bills trying to change police practices, change sentencing, change how the courts handle folks, change how prosecutors treat people of color. The list goes on. And I don't say that to give you my resume. I say that because there's a lot of change that needs to happen. And there's a lot of change that we have had to fight for, and there are a lot more changes that need to be made. And it's okay for us to say that, okay? I'm here as part of my business, as my profession, but this isn't just business. This is personal, okay? I've worked on criminal justice reform since before I got here. As a much younger person, I walked with hundreds of families who were victims of police abuse, fighting for a civilian review board. And they were scared to show up and tell their stories. And that's really what drove me to become an advocate and to come to this Capitol and help others tell their stories and fight for change. Because if we don't tell our stories, if we can't speak up and point out what is wrong and what needs to change, who will? Okay? When I was a kid, one of the things that drove me, personal story, that I'm going to tell you what you need to say today when you're in the Capitol visiting with the legislators. Give you some suggestions. When I was much younger, I was in grade school, my classmate was picked up for joyriding. They could have just cited him, let him go. No, they took him to juvenile hall. When he was in juvenile hall, he got sick. And he begged to be taken to the infirmary, to the hospital. They wouldn't take him. Young Mexican kid, they're like, he's faking. 48 hours later, his mom goes to see him, he's dead. This is life and death issues, okay? And that's what we have to remind our folks, and we've been hearing from Senator Bradford and everyone else today. This is not just about changing the law. It's about saving lives. As a lobbyist, I always tell my clients and the folks that come and lobby in the Capitol, my job is to, put you in front of the right people at the right time with the right message and say it in the right way. That's kind of my job, okay? And we were in a meeting yesterday, and I'll just point out one thing that was brought up. Somebody told us, well, okay, I get what you're saying about the bill, but who's the right person or right group to deliver the message? Now, I was sitting around a room with leadership from the Urban League, folks from CPE, who have lived this, who have breathed this. And they said they were basically saying it wasn't enough. Our voice wasn't enough. All of the studies weren't enough. All of our personal stories of our families and our friends weren't enough. The stories on television of people dying and being shot, being put on the side of the road when they don't deserve it, wasn't enough. Well, let us remind them two things today in your meetings. One is, we are enough. Okay? And what the 44th president said, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We are the ones they've been waiting for to hear from. And we have the voice, we have the messages, and the problem is not us delivering the message. The problem is that they are standing in the way. Okay? And I'll close on this. We were talking right before about, is this the right time? Because in politics, you got to figure out the right time to do things, right? Sometimes you have to do that. I think the message is a little different today. We have to look at those folks, governor's office, legislators' offices, and we have to ask them, why is this the time to stop this bill? Why is it okay to continue the status quo? Why is it okay to continue for what has happened for years and decades and generations of having to talk to our young kids about to have the talk? Why do we have to live with that again and again? And why do we have to tell the young folks that are here, why do we have to say that this is now going to be your burden for another year, another decade, another generation? Ask them, why are they standing in the way? Why are they the ones that are going to say this is the time to get in the way? It is not our burden to convince them. It is their responsibility to get out of the way and make this change happen. Stop the stop.